Hello everyone, bonjour à tous, dear colleagues. My name is Gabriella Reuss from Pazmany Péter Catholic University, Hungary, and this is my talk recorded here in Hungary for the 2020 Paris conference of the Societe Francaise Shakespeare. By sending this video to you, I hope to be at least virtually part of the scholarly discourse in Paris, which I cannot participate in person. I'm honored by your presence and looking forward to your questions, comments and pieces of advice after the talk in the Q&A session. Indeed, I do need your advice because the present subject is part of a larger project which demands much more research and time, and I'm not perfectly certain what direction to take. But both this talk and the idea of the project were prompted at the core by two things. The first one is that long ago I found the Shakespearean prom book, Macready's 1834 experimental staging of King Lear, 4 years preceding his much celebrated final restoration, in which he restored the tragic ending after the 150-year reign of Nahum Tate's saucy melodrama. And ever since, I've been wondering and also procrastinating how to introduce and share it. This is the prom book. The second one, that these days in our digital age, we are experiencing a renewed academic interest in theatre-related documents. Let us resort to mention only Tiffany Stern, whose volumes helped shift the focus from the finalized Shakespearean production onto the making of a production. We are fortunate enough to see that this interest is now being manifested, for instance, in the many digitized prom books by the National Art Library of the V&A, or even more prominently by the Forger Shakespeare Library, whose prom book collection is now made available online, unfortunately for a high fee and thus for the chosen few, but still. The forerunners of this field were, amongst a few others, Charles H. Shattuck and G.W. Stone, who dealt with or even published in facsimile hardly available prom books in the 1960s. In the 90s, Julie Hankey, Jackie Bratton and Christy Carson took up the thread and made these documents available in the plays and performance series that has proved highly successful ever since. And they experimented with the then new tool, the CD-ROM too. Let me turn briefly to the case of Macready and his relatively unknown prom book. Decades after his successful production in May 1834, whilst writing up his diaries and memories into his reminiscences, he disinherited his early charge in a letter to Lady Pollock, probably because it did not yet contain the character of the fool. Here in the picture we see the cut, the character of the fool. Mr. Macready, why did you omit the fool? Asked in the New Monthly magazine the sharp-penned journalist friend John Forster. By offering a sensitive interpretation of Shakespeare's tragic King Lear and by focusing on the role the Shakespearean fool, Forster effectively paved the way for Macready towards a next full restoration, which the actor mounted in 1838. Nonetheless, retrospectively, the vain and sensitive Macready may have felt that the early fool-less version would bring him shame, and he denied the experimental production. Perhaps the same sentiments hindered Macready to turn his neat prom book, in the picture, into a so-called acting copy. Now, how shall we see the value of a performance text which was, like Macready's 1834 one, denied by its creator? And how shall we appreciate a performance text that does not deserve denial, as it bears the traces of the hesitation about the fool? It was due to the lack of a suitable actor, then omitted. Should this experiment belong to what theatre critics, historians, and even the general public calls Macready's theatre? Furthermore, how did the mere existence of these annotated Shakespearean performance texts, such vast but quite ephemeral stage imaginings, either in the finalized, illustrated and edited public form or in their non-public, hastily sketched form, affect Shakespearean reception in the 18th and 19th centuries? What could have justified their existence, since quite uniquely British theatre history is abundant in these scripts? And what could be the cause for the gradual disappearance of these texts in late 19th century? These are the research questions for my larger project, and in the following 10 minutes I will only have time to speculate about the interaction between the Shakespearean performance text and the actors. Perhaps the word speculate hit your ears, but my use was not accidental. I actually take courage from Peter Davidházy, who diagnosed an epistemological shift in Shakespeare's studies and proved that Shakespeare scholars today are symptomatically engaged in speculation. As Davidházy noted, the verb speculate is less and less coupled with only, but even when it is, it usually comes with the new implication that there are issues worth speculating about. Now, let me invite you to consider an issue worth speculating about: the tradition of publishing performance texts and the impact they make on acting and spectating, which appeared to me as a uniquely British phenomenon. For quite a while, I agreed with Richard Shook, who in a review essay for the Shakespeare Quarterly in 2014 questioned and undermined the general practice of conceiving 18th and 19th century British theatre history quite simply as the mere succession of prominent star actors' management. Shook found that the way Russell Jackson concluded his chapter in Shakespeare in the 19th century was needlessly flat. It remains convenient, Jackson explains, to summarize Shakespearean production in 19th century London in quasi-Victorian terms of progress through an interrupted succession of prominent management, running from John Philip Campbell to Herbert Beerbohm Tree. Nonetheless, the practice criticized so far, I suppose, is not the work of certain narrow-minded theatre historians, but much rather the result of the combined effect of several factors. The long-run system, for instance, the bombastically cut and extremely star-centered performance texts. See the bombastic ending of King Lear in Act 1, by the disposition of the curse, and a quite special marketing practice of the prominent playhouses. The latter was the accompaniment of the long-running shows with the production's scripts. These are the so-called acting copies that were sold to lure more spectators to the playhouse, and more notably, to lure spectators to the same show multiple times. Now let us quickly clarify the terms. The acting edition or acting copy practically finalized all the changes indicated, or rather hastily scribbled, in the prom book. The prom book in general carried all the nuances that happened on the stage, informing the stage manager or the prompter about the lighting, the stage design, and related the lines with the stage business. It contained the cues as well. The prompter or the stage manager meticulously updated his book, or the Bible of the production. The acting edition was, however, intended for the spectator. There were plates in it, scenes from the performance with a tag of relevant lines, complemented the acting copy's text, and to give a fuller experience to the spectator, the volume started with a cast list and named the most significant artists from the production team. Late 19th century acting editions often offered more details. Even the costumes were described on the first pages, notably in American acting copies, perhaps to help the spectators identify the speakers on the boards. Usually, acting copies are having a frontispiece that adds, evidently to legitimize themselves, that they are accurately transcribed from the prom book. And here are a few examples. As it is now acted at the Duke's Theatre, printed from the acting copy with remarks from the prompter, as performed at the Theatre Royal Adolphe, correctly printed from the prompter's copy. As we see, the functions of these acting editions are multiple. Last year in Murcia, I talked about Othello's knife, with which the British Moors stabbed their Desdemonas, demonstrating that 18th century stage practice, not in the Shakespearean text, survived into 20th century productions through acting editions. This time, I would like to shed light onto the so-called points and the fragmented operatic nature of performance, which I assume to have disappeared with the appearance of continuous acting that rendered acting editions unnecessary and superfluous. Placing the transcript of a Shakespearean production into the viewer's hands will necessarily generate a number of consequences. First of all, spectators will know the locations, the characters, and the story that unfolds on the stage, so they will concentrate on the delivery, the longer speeches that are to be the individual and unique moments, the so-called points of the show. Secondly, by holding in hand an acting copy, spectators knew what to expect, moreover, when to expect it. They could time their arrival to the theatre accordingly, or simply return to their seats from the social life of the corridors just to catch what was thought to have been the highlights of a well-known role and have their share in the boos and the bravos. Dividing plays into dialogues that further the plot and soliloquies that express a mental or emotional state resembles both in structure and in effect to the build-up of operas, especially the opera seria that consists of recitatives and arias. Out of the two elements, the dialogues carrying the plot lines, either spoken or sung, were generally considered less important, whereas the soliloquies and the arias, especially the da capo arias, were the points that represented the heights of the show. He always used the terms of the opera seria to describe this phenomenon, and was happily surprised when I found that an opera expert, Jan Woodfield, compared the function of the aria to that of a point or a grand monologue. They were delivered with equal care, attention, and detailed choreography. There will be a slide about the poses. So in some, points and arias picturesquely dotted the performance, which was in turn quite fragmented. Now, in the following slide, we'll see how Bratton's book comments upon actors preparing for King Lear, and we'll see Macready's prom book as well, how he built up one of his points. This is the storm scene in King Lear. The poses described in terms of classicist aesthetics were to be seen, for instance, on many canvases and theatre stages throughout Europe. They relied on the mechanical perception of the human body and were not recorded in the acting copy, but they were there in their illustrations. Let us have a look at Gerard Leres's first book, Ideal Poses for Effective Genre Painting, which then was used for the learning or training of actors. These were developed into Enger's work, which is widespread in Europe. Even a Hungarian 19th century actor had it in his library, and actually Macready used the same book in Henry Siddons's translation and adaptation. So in some, acting copies convey the images of codified poses, passed on star-centered versions of Shakespearean text to one another, and cemented a fragmented acting and spectating practice. By being copied or stolen, their impact arched over continents. Actually, Charles Keane's King John, produced in New York in 1849, was this surprisingly similar remake of Macready's production in London 3 years earlier. Charles Keane had the means of having Macready's prom book copied for himself, of course secretly. No wonder that individual nuances, slight alterations, received particular interest from critics and readily lend themselves to the idea of theatre history seen as successive managements by star actors. Now here we are at Edmund's stage death. Edmund shouldn't die on the stage according to Shakespeare, but here in Macready's prom book he does. We see that Macready gave time and stage space to a minor character, and even when Edmund had no lines, Macready kept him in move. As you see Edmund endeavouring to rise and is assisted by 2 officers, so in his dying last movements are actually prescribed in Macready's prom book. In this, I see the germs of a new tendency, that of continuous acting, that gradually eliminated the necessity of acting copies. There was no need to time for the spectators to time their presence. They had to be tied to their seats. And this is what Macready seems to have experimented with already in 1834. But perhaps the above thoughts are just the result of the utter partiality of a Macready and a prom book fan. Thank you.